Okay, folks, excuse me. I know I don't mean to break this up. We got to start class, though. Couple minutes, huh? I hate to break this up, but we got to start class, though. I hate to break this up, but we got to start class, though. I mean,
My birthday's in a few weeks, so Saturday.
It's hopeless.
Yeah, I'm gonna make sure you know.
All right. I give up. Can we get started, please? Quiet, please. Well, I guess you're all wondering why I asked you here today.
Yes, we did.
No, excuse me, wrong group. We got money to make a videotape documentary about the history of Old South Portland. And we got money from the Northwest Film Studies Center, from Public Schools, and from the Oregon Committee for the Humanities that's going to give us enough money to hire a filmmaker who's going to teach us how to do all that stuff. We're going to do research. Some folks from Portland State are going to come over and show us how to use census materials and things like that. And as a result, we're going to make a documentary that's going to be maybe, 30, 40 minutes, and it's going to show the history of the old South Portland area. Now, a question might come to your mind.
Where is South Portland?
Hey!
All right.
That's a good question. Now, everybody knows where Civic Auditorium is, right?
No.
Across from the fountain?
Well, you know the place where, I mean, say if you were to graduate, where you'd walk across the stage and get your diploma. You know where Forecourt Fountain is?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, if you went and stood between Forecourt Fountain and had that on your right, and you had Civic Auditorium on your left, and you looked directly southward, what would you see?
South Portland.
Yeah, but right now you'd see these big skyscrapers, right, and a whole lot of concrete. Right. Okay. And what we're going to find out is that there used to be an old neighborhood there that was single-family dwellings, houses, apartments, and it housed Portland's immigrant community, largely Italians and old Jewish neighborhood as well. But, you know, what's going to happen then is that, like, you walk through that neighborhood now, you have no idea of what used to be there. What we're going to do is we're going to take people back into the past. We're going to recreate that neighborhood to give people a sense of what used to be there. Okay? Now, how many people feel a little bit intimidated by that? You think you can make a film?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll try hard.
You know, the first place that we're going to start is one of the old residents, this absolutely wonderful woman named Gussie Reinhardt, who's going to take us to,
She's really nice.
Gussie's going to take us to the only piece of that neighborhood that's left, this tiny little triangle called Lair Hill. And we're going to start introducing ourselves to the neighborhood by going down to that little historic area that's still left. And by looking at that, we'll give ourselves a sense of what the rest of the neighborhood used to be like. And Gussie Reinhardt is going to meet us at the only Orthodox synagogue left in Portland. It's called the Kesser Israel, down in Lair Hill, and is then going to show us around the neighborhood. And we're going to let that be our introduction into what South Portland used to be like. And Lair Hill, the northern boundary is Southwest Arthur, and then there's a triangle that goes south from Arthur, with Barber Boulevard on the west and Front Street on the east, and they meet at the southern point of Lair Hill. So that little piece of pie is the old Lair Hill area. This woman walks into a supermarket. She says, "I want half a head of lettuce."
When you walk around this area, try to walk from this area to the urban renewal area and see the difference in the kind of lifestyles that you will find. As you look into the new Portland Center area with all the high-rise condominiums, you know that you're not going to find children playing there, and really elderly people being able to maneuver too easily, particularly in the new fountain areas where you find such a labyrinth of steps.
I saw the neighborhood as it was, not really as it had been, and maybe that was the real fascination. Listening to the stories and being a person who has a capacity to visualize, as most of us do with an imagination, I then began to visualize the neighborhood as it had been, when it had been more than a series of dilapidated buildings and institutions and organizations that needed repair, but when it had been a neighborhood. You know, of course, the Jews began coming into the South Portland area probably in and around the 1890s. The greatest influx was 1905 to about 1910, prior to World War I. The later Jews came to the South Portland area because there were Jews who lived there before. And they tended to come into areas where there were, in quote, Landsen, or there would be self-help organizations. And all up and down the West Coast and through the West, there was a network of information about where more hospitable Jewish communities were. The institutions really did an incredible job, particularly Neighborhood House. I mean, Neighborhood House was initiated as a settlement house, and it served all of the people in the neighborhood, not only the Jews, but everyone who lived in the neighborhood. It taught the children the skills, the athletics that they had never, ever had. One picture after the other of girls in diaphanous fabric dancing in the gymnasium or in Lair Hill Park, and boys in boxing clothes and in basketball uniforms. The unique quality of having taken these children, you know, from the ghettos of Eastern Europe and from the streets of Piraeus and from the arbors of the Isle of Rhodes, and then to have given them athletic uniforms and put them into teams and given them this sense of themselves as only athletics and dance and music can, was really a very significant thing. Another most significant part, and perhaps the most prominent organization, was Failing School. And that had to be an absolutely unique educational institution, primarily because the principal, who was a woman, had students from 26 different countries. But there must have been a particular quality about her, a fairness, and she was a sizable woman. As a matter of fact, very, very large. I've seen photographs of her.
Most of the children there went to the old Failing School, where the famous Miss Fanny Porter was the principal. Nobody ever came tardy in Failing School, because Fanny, who weighed 300 pounds, would kill you. She never had a tardy. And if you got out of line or your parents came in to bawl her out, she'd grab them and kick them out.
Fanny G. Porter was her name. But she was a real disciplinarian. We loved her. But believe me, when we'd see her, no matter how we were cutting up, everybody would behave themselves. She'd walk by, everybody would get into good positions. There would be no pushing, no shoving. You couldn't run through the halls when Miss Porter was near. If she wasn't near, we'd run a little bit. If she came, we'd be very careful. If we did what we shouldn't do, she used to talk to us and then give us an uppercut. An uppercut.
Every house was a self-help organization in itself. Maybe not every one, but certainly every other one. And where, without the benefit of visiting nurse associations or all of the, quote, professional organization they have now, if someone was sick, the neighbors would bring in the food. People, an extended family would take care of other people's children in case of tragedy. And the stories that I heard were stories of such tragedies, of a peddler who had been killed on his route and everybody taking care of his family, and of the necessity of providing care for the indigent people who would come through that were indigent and would be sent to Mrs. Hyman's and fed and taken care of, and then Mr. Director would clothe them. And then a self-help, self-initiated organization, Jewish self-help organization, would then pay them a little bit to help them get started. And these free loan societies, as they were called, very historically a part of the Jewish community.
Most of the people in the early 1900s that came from Europe and came to Portland didn't have a place to stay, and my mother would call up a Mrs. Sweat and get places, and then they had the Free Loan Society where they loaned them approximately $200 without interest or without collateral to help them get started. As a result, my mother was very popular.
Well, very neighborly. We knew everybody for miles, not 5 blocks. We knew them from 5 miles down the street everywhere we went. We'd know the homes and the names, and people would knock on the windows, say hello to us. They were Jewish people. They were black people. They were Italians. They were Japanese. Oh, the Japanese were really nice. In fact, I went to school with all mixed, and I didn't know the difference. They were just, to me, they were one like me. You know, we were one person.
But I always look for what were the ingredients that made it seem like such a perfect life, because it wasn't. It was really hard. It was dusty, and it was dirty, and there was deprivation. People were poor. And again and again and again, people tell me that they were poor. But it didn't seem to matter, because everyone was poor. And that, I think, is probably the clue to it. There didn't seem to be any inequities.
The grocery stores gave people credit. During the Depression, where nobody had any money, everybody gave credit, and some of them almost went broke. But my mother, inside of 5 years, received 90% of the money that she had given credit to people.
Contrary to what's happening now, I think being the only black kid in the neighborhood over there served me a great purpose. It taught me that, you know, to be a human being, simply by being older, where all, you know, the older people were, and being around people, the type of people I was around in Southwest Portland. And hopefully, you know, they'll try and preserve more of it, which they are trying to do now. And it was just a warm feeling, a great feeling growing up over there. But we all lived. You know, it was just a very close, cozy, homey neighborhood. And I appreciate it for what it was.
Could you tell us a little more about the community that you lived in?
Yes, the community, as I said, was like a little town all of its own. We had a fish market, Mrs. Levine. We bought, you know, she had fish in the window that was swimming in the water there that she had, and we had all kinds of. We had a drugstore, we had delis, we had grocery stores. All that has been taken away, and Mrs. Levine, that's where people met. You know, it was like a fish market that would have today. People met there, and they sat there and talked for hours on end. And it was really enjoyable.
And this is my great friend Mel Blank, who went to school with me and who spent a lot of time in our fish market on Southwest First Avenue in South Portland, listening to foreign people of all nationalities, and where he developed the sound of all his different animals. On the other side was a fellow named Director, Simon Director, that had a meat market also, and who was very nasty with my mother. And one time my brother and I saw him getting a chicken in the back of our fish market, and we tipped the whole bucket of brine where he made kosher salami over Mr. Simon Director's head. And he couldn't do a darn thing about it. I'll never forget it.
There was one time when the women in the neighborhood felt that one of the butchers was being very unfair. He had a very heavy finger on the scale, and so they threw bricks through his window. And so I said, were these the Jewish women? She said, no, this was everybody. These were the Italian women, the Greek women, the Jewish women. So there were things like that that went on. What I'm saying is that it was not a perfect, beautiful neighborhood. There were probably arguments and so forth, and there were probably pies that somebody had cooling that someone stole. But for the most part, they were close and out of necessity very supportive of one another in some very difficult times. The newsboys were another entity. These were the youngsters who hawked newspapers on the corners, not of the South Portland area, but of downtown. But most of them lived in the South Portland area. And they did this in order to help support their families. And then they had, in terms of family support, a very, very good network. Because what they didn't have in their own families, they had in the network of the extended families. And I remember one woman said, you heard it in the tape, she said, I could go within a block, I could visit all of my very close friends who lived across the street and down the street. And she said something about the friends that I had then are the friends that I have now. So what they felt was this real stability of neighborhood. And that's something that very few people have today.
No, it's changed. That was really one of a kind, that part of the century.
Yeah, it was a really close-knit community, and the people, it seemed like they really didn't care what race you were and everything. It's just that, they all wanted to be one big community, one big family.
Yeah, I didn't even know about urban renewal at first, before this project. I just always thought those buildings have been there for a long time.
And then came this urban renewal a while back. They took away a lot of nice stores, restaurants, homes, real nice homes, pretty homes. They took away one of the churches. They took away a real beautiful Jewish church.
What happened here during the urban renewal in this area in particular, here and up above, the people came in the city, and a lot of land developers came in to buy up land. And there were people that had had homes there for 50 and 60 years. And when they weren't able to purchase the land through, legitimate means, they started coming in and condemning all this property. And they just took it. Matter of fact, they took one of my grandparents' lots.
And it's just too bad. People fought for many years. When the urban renewal was taking place, they did not want to relocate. But the old saying is, you can't fight City Hall, and that certainly is the truth. We were all buried, not dead, but alive. And the people that moved away from this neighborhood really didn't last very long.
Okay, the process of urban renewal involves the local government acquiring private land and assembling small pieces of private land until you have a very large parcel that covers several blocks that can be developed, as a package. And then it usually clears all of the land, clears the old buildings that's acquired, sometimes changes the street pattern, and then either builds on the land itself or resells it to a private developer. And usually what they do, the terminology is they write down the value of the land. In other words, they sell it real cheap, often at below cost, in order to get a new developer in to develop that land. So that's what happened in the South Auditorium of Portland Center urban renewal area where the land was acquired from a whole bunch of individual private owners, assembled by the city using federal money that was passed down to the city, and then the city turned around and sold that land to various private developers for office buildings or some of the high-rise apartments down there.
Well, the Portland Development Commission was created by a vote of the people. I think it was, now the year I'm not sure of, but I think it was 1958. And what essentially it is a body of people appointed by the mayor to redevelop parts of the city. And what it used to do was to tear down whole neighborhoods and put up high-rises and new super blocks of buildings. It has a lot of power. It has the right to take buildings down and to relocate people. And it has that power without the officers of it being elected by the people.
Could you tell us a little more about the urban renewal?
Well, the urban renewal started in about the year 59. It took about 10 years for the houses to be taken away. They paid them I don't know what, but it wasn't very much for their property. And it stopped. The urban renewal started, I think, down on Market Street or down by the auditorium. And it went all the way up to the corner where I live, 2nd and Arthur. That's when it stopped.
Okay, well, what ended up happening was that the people were made to move. Some of the older people had to move more than once because they were first moved into apartment houses that later were leveled for the freeways. And for many of those people, it was a real blow. And we have some indication that a lot of them, that it broke their spirit, and that a lot of them ended up dead within a very short time after that. For others of them, for many of the people in the ethnic communities, Italian and Jewish, it sort of ended the ethnic community. There wasn't a Jewish bakery, for example. There weren't kosher markets, which are part of the religious tradition of Jewish people. All that stuff just disappeared.
Urban renewal was an important thing to have happened to South Portland at that time because you were looking at a really dilapidated inner city. It has provided housing close in, perhaps not the low-cost housing that it should have done at the time. And when you consider that 54 blocks were torn down and the 11,000 or so people that were displaced at the time, true, that sounds like a terrible thing, but one has to remember what the condition was, not only of the property that was there, but a good deal of the property was absentee landlord owned. And so people had bought this property with the idea of an investment, and they were not maintaining it.
Would you say the urban renewal was for the better or for the worse?
Well, it really depends on your point of view. From the point of view of people who are living in the area, it disrupted a natural community. You know, all that's really left of the old South Portland neighborhood is the Lair Hill area, which is a few blocks long and about 2 blocks wide, and a couple remnants there of the old neighborhood institutions, like the old neighborhood house. From the point of view of the city as a whole, it probably got some things that really needed. It got a downtown university campus. It got an urban renewal area that is a lot better designed than you find in most cities, that at least is integrated into the fabric of the city. So it's probably about 50-50 on the pluses and minuses.
As I said earlier, it is difficult to evaluate a project like this. I think in retrospect one would say that it has brought a good deal to the city. It has meant, I suppose, a more serviceable, a more manageable, a more orderly process of growth. But the lesson learned, I suppose, is that citizens should participate in the whole process, and they did not really participate in the early process. They weren't required to, and they weren't organized.
A few years later, when there were some plans to extend urban renewal down into the Lair Hill area, the neighborhood at that point really got angry. The people who were left, what's now the Lair Hill, very small Lair Hill area, got very angry, organized and protested at the end of the 1960s, very beginning of the 1970s, and helped to block any extension of the urban renewal down into that area. And the revival or the preservation of the Lair Hill area really is attributable to that kind of neighborhood activity.
But that old ethnic community, that old-fashioned style was gone forever. And in its place are a lot of high-rise buildings that, some of them are nice, but nobody like you or I could afford to live in them.
So when you can visualize that, then you really despair at the demise of a neighborhood, not the demise of an old section of the city or the tearing down of an old house, but the demise of
I don't know, when we first started, it seemed, I don't know, you can imagine it, but it seemed like kind of a fantasy, you know, but now that we're actually doing it, it just seems fantastic that we're actually doing it, we're actually doing it.
I didn't want to do it. I was kind of apprehensive about it because I didn't know anything about making a film. And I told Mr. McKenna that, and he kind of got mad at me, and he said, well, just stick with it. So that's what I've been trying to do.
A lot of stuff about the Jewish people I never knew, like their customs and stuff, you know, with the little hats and everything.
And she showed me this big thing on the wall that lights up 3 times a year with names of dead people. And, you know, 3 times a year they say prayers to them. And she showed me the names of her mother, brothers, and father. It was all in Hebrew. She got kind of emotional, you know, when she showed me that. It was kind of, you kind of tell she remembers a lot.
Look now, I'm done.
One more time.
I'm missing class.
Take us